Well, our largest wind turbine at the moment, which is slightly smaller than your largest one, the diameter of the blades is 154 metres. And that's much bigger, say, than the London Eye. The tip of the blades travel at about 180 miles an hour. Each blade weighs about 25 tonnes, and so as it goes over, it kind of bends under gravity that way and it flops over the other way. And so they go round 200 million times in their life. So they've got to be very strong, very lightweight and very flexible for what they do. And they're actually quite a high technology piece of engineering.
The blade technology, MHI Vestas' largest blade is 80 metres, which means that the whole turbine has a rotor diameter of 164 metres, which is over double the rotor diameter of the first commercial offshore wind farm in the UK. So you can see that in that time, the size of the turbines has more than doubled, but the output from the turbine has quadrupled. So the technology is really developing all the time. 80 metres, that's the equivalent of 9 London buses, which is a full-blown traffic jam in my book.
Yeah, seeing them on the horizon, you don't really get that sense of scale. I was lucky enough to go out to an offshore wind farm site last year. I've been working with offshore wind for 5 years. It was my first site visit, and it actually blows you away just when you're there, real up close to a turbine, and you just get a real sense of the size of them. And they're also quite spaced out, but you don't see that on the horizon. To you, it seems like a number of turbines quite closely packed together, whereas actually there's up to 500, maybe even more metres apart. And just the sheer scale of the wind farm itself is really impressive.
It's far from experimental. This is a technology that's really come of age in the last few years here in the UK. We combine different disciplines, things that have never been done anywhere in the world before. And so we've had to learn as we've gone along, but we've now got to the stage where a typical wind farm now might cost £1.5 billion to build. That's a really large power industry investment. It's a full-size power station, and people wouldn't be investing that much money if they couldn't see that it worked and that it was a stable industry.
I think, a good analogy would be looking at cars. 50 years ago, the cars that they had around then are so different to the really sleek, modern, sophisticated cars that we have now. And the principles of offshore wind have remained pretty much the same. It's just the technology that we are using to sort of get there is evolving all the time. So we're getting different foundations, different turbines, all the different components are changing so that we get sort of more sophisticated, cutting edge, higher technology offshore wind farms out there. So it's really exciting times actually, but it definitely does work.
Well, actually, I don't think it's going to be around the wind turbines. I think the wind turbines will go on getting larger and more reliable. Last month, we unveiled a new design for an offshore substation that's about 1/3 lower cost than the previous design. So there's still innovation like that to be had in this industry.
I think foundation types and installation techniques are going to really sort of open up new opportunities. We've seen a few wind farm projects that were planned but weren't able to sort of actually go ahead because the ground conditions were more challenging than anyone had ever anticipated. So I think new technologies for the actual foundations and getting them in there in those challenging ground conditions are really going to change the playing field.
The two biggest things for the wind industry are actually nothing to do with wind, and that's battery storage and interconnection with other countries. Those two things are definitely going to come in the next 10 to 15 years, and they will take us from a sort of theoretical limit at the moment where you can only have a certain percentage of your power supply from wind to actually we can export as much as we're able to make to the rest of Europe. Well, the challenge with an interconnector, you want to take a large amount of power from one country to another country, whereas if you were to spread your wind turbines all the way along that interconnector, it'd be quite difficult to feed the power in. But what we will see is perhaps a hub halfway along an interconnector where several wind farms might feed in, and that's quite a cost-effective thing, and we'll see that probably not in the next 5 to 10 years, but after that. I've seen some of the numbers on this, and the challenge with high altitude power generating kites is effectively how you get the power down to the ground. The weight of a power cable is quite heavy, and I think there's a niche application for this, maybe remote scientific sites where there's no other kind of power generation, but the numbers I've seen so far suggest it's probably not a large-scale application. But we always look for what the new technology is going to be.
It's always healthy to see what innovation is going on and sort of ideas for new technologies, and then where you can, pull those ideas into the existing offshore wind industry that we've got. I mean, floating wind, for example, that was a concept that was developed a few years ago, but you know, it's sort of come several years after we've started building wind farms as we see them in the UK, and we could see large-scale deployments of floating wind in the UK in the future, but inevitably these ideas require a bit of time for development and testing and to see if it actually works. The three-bladed turbines that we have at the moment, they're definitely doing the job.
Industry's done a lot to get the cost down over the last few years, and we've all made investments on the basis of this market in the hope and expectation that it's going to happen. To see costs come down further, we need just a little bit more forward visibility from government, and hopefully whoever's in power, they'll recognise that offshore wind works, it's popular and the cost is coming down, and we need to do more of it.
It's all about deployment and making sure that deployment can happen, that it can be financed, that it can be supported.
We've created over 1,000 jobs in the UK in the last 3 years working in the wind industry, particularly offshore wind. When we announced the whole factory last year, that's going to be another 1,000 jobs. But every one of those, when you're trying to decide, should I take on another apprentice, should I create another job, it all depends on there being the visibility of a future pipeline of work. And that's where we need government to support the industry by just saying, yeah, we get it, this is important for the UK's future, there's a long-term business here.